All right, let's dive right in. Today we're tackling a really big idea from Nancy Fraser's book, Cannibal Capitalism. We're going to explore her argument that racism isn't just some unfortunate bug in the system, but that it's actually a core feature. We're breaking down Chapter 2, called Glutton for Punishment, to really get at the deep structural links she sees between capitalism and racial oppression. Let's get into it. So, Fraser kicks things off with this massive question that really frames everything else. Is the connection between capitalism and racism just some horrible, tragic accident of history? Or is it actually hardwired into the system's DNA? Is it something capitalism needs to function? To figure that out, we're going to follow Fraser's roadmap. First, we'll look at this whole idea of structure. Then, we'll unpack 3 different ways of looking at what capitalism even is. After that, we get to her 2 central concepts, exploitation and expropriation. We'll trace how that duo has played out through history, which brings us to a real puzzle about our world today. And finally, we'll see where Fraser thinks we can go from here. Okay, first up, the question of structure. Fraser's point here is that if we want to know if racism is essential to capitalism, just looking at individual events isn't going to cut it. We have to go deeper. We have to look at the system's actual blueprint.
Her main claim is actually pretty straightforward, but it's powerful. She says, look at any version of capitalism you can think of, from slave-based plantation capitalism centuries ago to the Jim Crow industrial era, right up to the mass incarceration system we see today, and you will always find racial oppression tangled up in it. The link, she argues, is always there, even as the system itself changes.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. Fraser says that whether or not you even see a structural link between capitalism and racism, well, it all depends on how you define capitalism in the first place. The definition you start with pretty much determines the answer you're going to get. So she lays out 3 common ways people look at capitalism. First, there's the exchange perspective. This sees the market as this colorblind machine. From this view, racism is just an outside problem, a historical accident. Then there's the classic Marxist view, focused on exploitation, the struggle between owners and workers. It explains class really well, but it kind of leaves race as this big, unanswered question. And finally, you have the expropriation view, which is all about conquest and theft. This one gets us way closer to understanding race and violence, but it struggles to connect it all back to the day-to-day economy. So you see, on their own, none of these really show us a structural link. And this is where Fraser makes her big move. She argues that the only way to see the deep connection is to stop treating these ideas as separate. The breakthrough moment, she says, comes when you combine exploitation and expropriation, when you realize they aren't 2 different things, but 2 sides of the very same capitalist coin. So that brings us to the absolute core of her theory, these 2 exes that power the whole system. Seriously, understanding the difference between these 2, and more importantly, how they work together, is the key to unlocking her entire argument. First up, we have exploitation. If you've read any Marx, this one will sound pretty familiar. It's all about legally free workers who sell their labor for a wage. The capitalist pays them, sure, but they pocket the extra value that the worker creates as profit. The key words here are legally free and contractual. And then we have the second X, expropriation. This is a whole different beast. It's not about contracts, it's about pure confiscation. We're talking about the raw taking of land, resources, and labor from people who are denied full legal and political rights. Think slavery, colonialism, land grabs, even modern stuff like predatory debt. This is accumulation through pure force and dependency. Okay, now for the brilliant part, the connection. These are not separate tracks. Fraser argues that expropriation is the hidden foundation that makes exploitation possible in the first place. You see, by confiscating cheap resources like cotton and cheap food from an expropriated group, capitalists can drive down their own costs. That means they can pay their free workers lower wages, which makes the whole system of exploitation profitable. Fraser has this incredibly powerful phrase that just nails this idea. Behind Manchester stands Mississippi. Think about that. The profitable exploitation of those quote-unquote free factory workers in the industrial center of Manchester, England, was completely dependent on the brutal expropriation of enslaved people's labor on the cotton plantations of Mississippi. One process literally enables the other. So how does this division even happen? Fraser argues it's not natural, it's political. The state actively steps in and creates 2 different categories of people. On one hand, you get the citizen worker. They're legally free, they have rights, and they're supposed to be protected from having their stuff just taken. On the other hand, you have the expropriable subject, someone who is defined as politically dependent, who is stripped of those protections, and is basically marked as open to being violated. And right here, This is it. This is the absolute core of Fraser's entire argument. She says the structural basis for racism is found right in this politically created divide. Capitalism needs both exploitation and expropriation to survive. And race, she argues, becomes the social and political marker, the label, that's used to sort people into these two groups, to decide who gets to be a free worker and whose stuff can be taken without consequence.
Now, Fraser is quick to point out that this structure isn't set in stone. It has changed and morphed over the centuries. She actually traces how this relationship between exploitation and expropriation has shifted through the different historical eras of capitalism.
She maps out 4 main phases. First, there was mercantile capitalism, where expropriation, think conquest and slavery, was the main game, and the idea of race was just starting to form. Then came liberal colonial capitalism in the 19th century. This is where you get a very stark divide. White workers are exploited in the core countries, while people of color are expropriated in the colonies. This really hardened that color line. By the mid-20th century, under state-managed capitalism, the line gets blurry. Racialized groups inside the core countries start to experience a mix of both. And that leads us to today, under financialized capitalism, where this mixed model has basically gone universal. Expropriation, through things like predatory debt, now hits almost everyone.
And this history leads us straight into the central puzzle, the big paradox of our time. If that old structure that neatly separated people along racial lines is breaking down, why on earth does racism seem to be getting worse, not better?
I mean, really think about it. We live in an age of precarious work and crushing debt. A lot of people who used to be considered protected are now getting a taste of expropriation. So why aren't we seeing some massive cross-racial alliance of people saying, hey, we're all in this together? Why does it feel like racial hostility is actually getting more intense?
Because, let's be honest, despite this big structural shift, racial oppression is as real as ever. Fraser points to just overwhelming evidence. People of color still face disproportionate poverty and incarceration. They were the ones specifically targeted by the predatory loans that blew up the economy in 2008. They face systemic police violence. They suffer the most when public infrastructure fails, like in Flint, Michigan. The burdens of war and climate change, they fall heaviest along these same racial lines. So no, racism is clearly not going away.
So here is Fraser's answer to that puzzle. Just because we're all feeling more vulnerable, that does not automatically create solidarity. In fact, she says, it can do the exact opposite. When you pile all this new insecurity and anxiety on top of centuries of an existing racial hierarchy, the result is toxic. It breeds paranoia, a desperate search for scapegoats. And that, she argues, is why we're seeing this intensification of racism, as people who once felt secure are now scrambling and looking for someone to blame.
So, given this really complex and, frankly, pretty grim picture of where we are now, what does Fraser's analysis tell us about the path forward? What are the political takeaways for anyone who wants to fight racism?
Fraser's conclusion is bold, and it's totally uncompromising. She says that fighting these battles in separate silos just won't work anymore. Anti-racism by itself isn't enough. Class struggle by itself isn't enough. Because exploitation and expropriation are two heads of the same monster, you have to fight them together. For her, the only real path forward is to build broad, cross-racial alliances with one single aim: to get rid of the entire system that needs both to survive. And that brings us to the final, really critical question for you to think about as you finish the reading. Fraser's whole theory points to the need for these new, broad, cross-racial alliances. So with everything we've just talked about, this universal insecurity, but also this rise in racial tension, what do you see as the real-world challenges and possibilities for building those alliances today? I really want you to take that question with you, think about it, and bring your ideas to your class discussion and to the online Padlet.